This here is an i7 B550 motherboard from NZXT. And a lot of you have told me that you really like the way that this board looks. One of the cleanest looking B550 boards on the market, and best of all, you can get it in either black or white. Now look, I'll level with you, there's really nothing super special about this board from a performance standpoint. It's not the best performing B550 board I've ever tested, and there's nothing really special about this from a price perspective either, because it's actually quite expensive. This is an ASRock manufactured motherboard with NZXT branding, NZXT plating, of course. One of the reasons why people like the way this board looks is because it is so clean thanks to these large metal plates that cover much of the PCB. And while I do appreciate NZXT's inclusion of white variants for their i7 motherboards like the one you're seeing here, I feel like we need to take it up a notch. So this right here is an MSI Evoke RX 5700. You might be thinking, well, Greg, what are we talking about this older card for? It was plagued with the memory thermal pad issue, which this one has been relieved of, by the way. This doesn't really seem relevant to the topic of painting a motherboard. Well, I must confess that I've always had a special place in my heart for the way that this card looked. And it's not really about the shape or design of the card. I actually think it looks rather bland, but the color of this thing definitely stands out, and I really like the fact that MSI took a leap of faith with this one. Like, most cards are either white or black or somewhere in between, but gold? I mean, come on, this is straight up bling right here. So picture this gold graphics card paired with this motherboard also painted gold. Maybe the golds don't match. I don't know, I might be regretting that at the end of this, but I think that we can get pretty close and we're gonna give it a shot. This motherboard is one of the best for painting if you decide to do it again, because they have these larger metal shrouds that cover everything. So I think that if you're gonna do it with a modern board, it might as well be this one. And I chose the white model because white's easier to paint over if you're talking about a lighter color like yellow or gold. So we'll see how it goes. One big experiment. I will show you though how to disassemble this thing and get it prepped for painting. I'm not a pro painter, I'll say that right out of the gate, but I have painted many components in the past, and I'm really excited to see how this turns out. So bear with me, stick around. NZXT's BLD Foundation pre-built PCs are a great way for folks to easily get into PC gaming without breaking the bank. Reeling over 100 FPS in League and Valorant and over 60 FPS in Fortnite, all with settings at medium and in 1080p. That ain't too bad at all. And perhaps best of all, this build is super easy to upgrade down the line with a discrete graphics card, since you've still got 6 multi-threaded Zen 3 CPU cores to pair it with. NZXT's BLD pre-builds waive the $99 build fee since they're made in bulk, and you'll get a 2-year parts and labor warranty with every purchase. Learn more about BLD systems, including this Foundation PC here, via the link below. So again, one of the very unique things about this B550 motherboard from NZXT is the fact that it has this large shroud. It's actually in multiple pieces. You can see that some of these pieces are just held on by a little clip, maybe a little magnet, and they come off fairly easy. So we'll go ahead and remove these now. These are usually to cover the M.2 slot. You can see 2 here. There are a few other pieces we need to tackle from the rear, however. So this large piece here is made of metal, but it's held into the back of the board via screws. So you'll find several of these smaller black Phillips screws that are holding on this metal shroud. We need to remove these to get that shroud off. So 8 screws in total. The shroud should be removed now. Let's carefully flip the board back over and look at that. So this large piece here has been removed, and our board is now looking much more like a conventional motherboard. Now there's one other piece we want to paint, and that's this white strip surrounding the VRM MOSFET heatsink. This is purely aesthetic. The heatsink underneath does serve some purpose, but this white little shroud here I think is adhered. So we're gonna remove the heatsink itself and then try to peel off this white little cover, and then that way we'll have all of the white components ready to paint. There we are. All right, now this board is looking super bare bones. Now we could go a lot further than this, and I've documented that in our how to deep clean a motherboard video, which I'll have linked below. Needless to say, we could remove this chipset heatsink here, which isn't really a heatsink, it's just kind of a slab of metal. We could also remove this rear I/O cover, but it doesn't really do us any good because these black accents will still be in the heatsink itself, which we are not going to paint. Again, we're just gonna be painting the white cover on top. And so the way that this is set up, the chipset underneath will be seen through the perforations here on the metal cover. So we'll have gold with some black accents, which I think looks really nice. Now we might need our pry tool for this. You really don't want to bend this metal because it could completely compromise the material. But yeah, it's definitely just held in by an adhesive, which means it should be pretty straightforward to reapply once it's painted. If we can carefully push it up from underneath. There we go. So yeah, just a bit of adhesive around the perimeter of this piece, but check it out. Now it's gonna be so much easier to paint. We don't have to worry about masking anything off. This is gonna stay black. So our goal here is to minimize the amount of masking if possible, and I think we can also do the same for this large piece here. So if you flip it over, you can actually see that there's some black trim in here, and I think this is very easy to remove. It should just slide right out if I recall. At least that's how the older in7 motherboards were. Let's see. Oh, yep, okay, that was nice and quick. Don't want to break the plastic. Let's try to be a bit more careful up here. All right, cool. So, white piece here, we can paint. Not really worried about the underside. It'll probably see some overspray, but there's really no point again in painting because it's not going to be seen. But this entire front section, we can paint. This piece, we can paint. And then we have these two pieces here. Now, these also have little black inserts. I'm not, again, too sure how these are held in. I think they're held in by adhesive. Yep, so maybe we can remove these. I'm not too sure. It's probably not gonna matter though, because again, it's underneath and it's not really going to be seen. Wow, okay, so that was a bit excessive there on the adhesive. We were able to isolate just the white metal portion of this that we do want to paint, and then this part underneath you can see how much adhesive was used, and this is pretty tough stuff. So be careful here. This metal piece, it will bend. All right, and these pieces are ready to go. Now we could go a bit more in depth in this. We could prime and prep these. You could sand them down a bit so that the paint adheres a bit longer, but since these are going to stay in a PC case for the most part, they're not going to be exposed to the elements. I think that it'll be just fine painting over this as is. All right, so now we're outside. I'm actually in my garage because it's a bit more controlled out here. I'm not worried about overspray onto the ground, and I can actually close the garage door more or less depending on how much wind is getting in here. You don't want it to be too cold. You also don't want it to be too hot, so be careful. Now, speaking of paint, this is Krylon Metallic Gold Paint Plus Primer. Now, I tend to stick with Rust-Oleum products. They work a bit better in my experience. I've just had, better luck with their stuff, but this was one of the only metallic gold spray paints I could find on Amazon that could get here in a reasonable amount of time, so that's why I went with this. We'll test it out. Now again, I'm not too sure about color. I'm not sure how close this will match that MSI Evoke card that I showed you earlier in the video, but we're gonna do some test paints and see. I mean, it's gonna be close. I don't think it's gonna be the exact match. I didn't expect it to be an exact match, but I just don't want it to be like close to the point where they're clashing, but not close enough to where it looks like they kind of work well together. So I don't think we'll truly know until this paint is settled on the actual metal shrouds we're painting. This is on styrofoam, so the texture is all screwed up. But all right, I mean, it checks out somewhat. Now the first coat's gonna go on. You wanna shake this can vigorously. Be sure to read the directions. Every can of paint is a little different. You wanna start spraying away from the object you're trying to paint. Then you're gonna wanna spray over it, and don't stop spraying until you're pointing away from that object again. This will prevent those ugly splotches of paint that kind of spray at the end and the beginning from showing up on the object itself. Make sure you're tackling all sides while doing this, and well, all exposed sides, I should say. And I think we're about good here on our first coat. Don't want to go too heavy. Want this to settle, and we'll see where we go from here. Let me give you a quick close-up. Again, this is just the first coat, so it's not supposed to look super pretty yet. There will obviously be areas that need a bit more paint than others, and that's what you should take this time to do. Identify those spaces that maybe have a bit too much paint, some spaces that don't have enough of it, especially along the sides. See this very small strip here is gonna need a bit more paint along the top portion of it. And there's probably some stuff, let's see. The inside of that actually looks pretty good. Just a few other places that I'm keeping note of, and I mean, like here, we definitely need to paint a bit more next time. I kind of missed that. We got it here, but yeah, the corners are lacking a bit. So I'm keeping note of all of that just internally in preparation for the second coat, which should be applied in a few more minutes. And it's time for coat number 2. Here we go. Now comparing it at this point to the graphics card, I know the lighting is pretty awful in here, so bear with me. The motherboard shroud is definitely going to be a bit darker of a gold. It's also got a bit more of a matte finish, so I think what I'm going to do is apply a few clear coats to it after the fact to give it a bit of a shimmer to match the card. Now for the clear coat, I like to use automotive enamel. This is just gloss, so it's going to be clear to give you that nice finish, and of course going with Rust-Oleum where I can. Now as these few coats of gloss enamel are drying, you can see that there are a few issues with the way that the metallic gold came out. First off, there are these very strange kind of like pits that show up, and that's just of course because the environment isn't perfectly controlled and because I'm not applying paint as evenly as I would like. Again, I'm not a pro at this, I don't claim to be. And so yeah, just because of the paint we're working with, the finish isn't consistent all the way around. I think it looks really good. Honestly, the camera's doing me a good service here. But to the naked eye, I would say it's between a 1 and 2 foot mod. So if you're standing 2 feet back, many of those imperfections kind of just disappear. A good example of the paint beating up is right over this grill here. For some reason, this place was just one of the hardest hit. And part of the reason why it beads up is because you spray it too hard the first time, so you have too thick of a coat, and then any extra layer on top of that will just kind of bead up, kind of like how water does. It's just surface tension. So this was more or less just user error. I'm just not as familiar with this kind of paint. It's very different working with like a metallic gold than it is working with like a satin black or some very neutral color. This is definitely a learning curve, something you might want to try on just a piece of paper or something, just get the hang of it, applying multiple coats before you start on something like this. That said, I think the texture is okay. I mean, it's not, again, perfect, but I kind of like the fact that it's not all perfectly smooth. It makes it look a little more like true metal instead of just a kind of a faux glossy texture. And now we've moved on to day 2. Now, remember, this is how the motherboard looks without all the cool shrouds and things on it, right? This is a pretty bare bones B550 board. So check out how this looks. Now, I've already fit the trim underneath back on, so you can see we've got the black trim here for this larger metal piece. And yeah, I think this looks really good. Now, you could be super nitpicky with my painting and say that it looks like trash because, well, I'm a professional painter. I know what I've been doing for 20 years and you did that horribly. Well, I'm sure you could probably say that, and possibly with good reason. Look, I could have definitely done better than this, but for my first time working with this kind of paint, I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how it turned out. Yes, there are some weird textures and weird matting, there's some bubbling, but overall, I think that it actually works. We've got our other 2 pieces here that, again, I've already fit together as well. So this is a VRM heatsink with the gold over the black, and then also this other plastic piece. Actually, one of them is already connected. It's here at the bottom. So yeah, this came out better than I thought. Now what we need to do is combine it all on the board. And this is where the magic happens. I did a little test fit off camera and I kind of spoiled it for myself, but it looks freaking awesome. So check this out. It's just gonna sit more or less, let's see, like this right here. Oh yeah, that looks so good if I do say so myself. So with this aligned, we can flip it upside down. We've got our screws, so let us get this in a position. All right, and flip it back over. Now, how does this tie in to the gold on the graphics card that I showed you? Well, this is where things get a bit more disappointing. The gold is, it's definitely a few shades lighter. You can see underneath the board is just, yeah, I'd say it's probably 3 shades darker than this gold here. It's still gold. It's not like a rose gold or anything. So, I mean, I think that the overall like shade of gold, not shade as in like light or dark, but the actual color itself is pretty spot on. We just need this to be either 3 shades darker or this to be 3 shades lighter. And I'm just not skilled enough to try to balance that out with white or whatever. I don't want to mess it up. I still am happy with the way this turned out. And when we get these both in a build, I think that because this, since I'm going to turn it vertical, I didn't tell you that earlier, but it's going to sit kind of like this in front of it. I think it's still going to look nice because there's going to be shadows and things in the case that we use. So I don't expect the colors to match perfectly either way. So now we need to fit the VRM MOSFET heatsink. This one is going to look pretty sweet as well. There we go. Oh yeah, this looks awesome. Here, I'll flip it around so that your orientation makes a bit more sense. Yes, this is now my favorite motherboard. I love this color. God, I wish that more motherboard manufacturers would diversify outside of like black and white. I mean, even white motherboards are rare, but like gold, This has got to be, I mean, there's probably only a few proper gold motherboards in existence, custom or not. And when we combine it with our graphics card, it's gold on gold. I mean, it works. Yeah, the gold shades are a bit different again, but this is, I mean, to me, this is better than just having a black motherboard behind it and this being the only thing gold in the build. Speaking of, what does it look like in a case? Now, I'll show you a full build at some point in a different video. I want to spend a bit more time sourcing gold components for that. But in a black case, yeah. It looks so good. And here's an idea of what it'll look like with the graphics card turned vertically. This particular one, again, being gold, means it'll kind of sort of blend in. Again, it's a little lighter, but I think it still works. We might tweak some things when it comes to the actual build, the official build video, that again will be coming soon. But for now, I'm really happy. It could have turned out a lot worse. Knowing myself and how unskilled I am in the painting sphere, yeah, definitely could have been a lot worse. So I really hope you've enjoyed watching this painting process play out. I think this was the perfect candidate here, this N7 B550 board from NZXT. They do have many boards that look like this, multiple chipsets, including some of the latest from Intel as well. But this B550 chipset, I mean, this one hits real close to home because AM4 socket, of course, very versatile, means it can run a plethora of AMD CPUs, and most of those are very budget friendly. So despite the fact that this board costs a bit more than your average B550 motherboard, you can still pair it with pretty decent value options from Team Red. So if you want to check out this motherboard, it is in the video description. You can also find the paint supplies that I use, mainly just the spray paints, the Krylon metallic gold, as well as the gloss engine enamel. I recommend starting with something cheaper if you're not very familiar with painting. Again, I've done it in the past, and I'm certainly no pro, but I did kind of know what I was getting myself into, apart from the fact that this paint does behave a bit weird. You also want to make sure that you're in a controlled environment, and be sure to follow the directions on the back of each of those spray paints. With that, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know, give this one a thumbs up. That would be appreciated. I totally slurred all of that together into just one big mumbo jumbo. But anyway, yeah, thanks for that. And then also be sure to subscribe if you have not already. If you're not subscribed, what the heck are you doing here? Leave a comment down below and stay tuned for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for painting with me.